Good evening. I would like to call to order the May 17, 2021 Lake Washington School Board meeting. Let the record reflect that all board members are present. And on March 1, all school districts began to hold in-person public board meetings. But to attend, you must pre-register, and due to limited seating capacity, registrations are on a first-come, first-served basis and accepted until 1 p.m. on the date of the meeting. If you would like to attend a meeting, please email Diane Jenkins at djenkins@lwsd.org, and she will confirm your attendance. All attendees are required to wear a face mask and maintain 6 feet of physical distance at all times. Upon arriving at the Resource Center, the public will be required to check in and follow the attestation process. In addition, board meetings, study sessions, and special board meetings will continue to be live streamed and viewable on the district's website. If you are unable to live stream the meeting, viewers can call 425-936-2813, and the conference ID is 37127 to listen to the meeting. Okay, I will now entertain a motion to approve the May 17, 2021 agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Director Carlson and seconded by Director Bleasner that we approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye.
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 All those opposed, hearing none, the motion carries. The first item on our agenda is a recognition of our National Board Certified Teachers. Dr. Holman.
Absolutely. And given our times, we've historically done this as an in-person event. I'd like to invite Associate Superintendent Mike Van Orden to the podium to share with the board and recognize our staff that have gone through the process, even during these trying conditions, and achieved their National Board certification either as a renewal or as a first-time individual. And so, Mike, there you go.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Holman. As Dr. Holman mentioned, you may recall in past years, we've had all of our National Board Certified teachers come up to acknowledge and recognize them. Obviously, we're in slightly different times, but we're looking forward to the time we can bring them back. Also, before we recognize our teachers, I want to recognize Emily Young, our Director of Professional Learning, and her staff who support our National Board Certified teachers and have been doing, as everybody in our system, extra work this year to figure out how to provide classroom experiences and observation experiences in a remote and now in an in-person setting. So as you may recall, National Board certification is to recognize teachers for meeting a exceptionally high standard for the teaching profession. This is a process that takes multiple years, that betters our teachers and also betters our whole system. There are assessments that our folks are involved. That includes video recordings. And again, as you can imagine this year, that's been an interesting dynamic. Classroom-based portfolios of student work, written reflections of their classroom assessments and students, and content knowledge tests. So again, multiple tiers and multiple ways that our National Board teachers need to demonstrate competency in order to receive the certification. It's also built around 5 propositions. And so again, we want well-rounded teachers, and we want to make sure that they're well-equipped to get that National Board certification. So we have teachers committed to student learning, knowledge of the subject they teach, so you can start to think about the complexity of each of these, managing and monitoring student learning, thinking about practice, reflecting on their learning, and being members of learning communities. This is very much in line with what we expect of all of our teachers, but it asks our National Board Certified teachers to focus in on each of these propositions. So we have a number of teachers who are receiving their first-time certification: Kristen Becker-Brown, Dina Kernish, David Menenberg, Kara Riley, and Samantha Powers at middle, high school, and elementary school. And then we have teachers that are receiving renewal. So these are folks that didn't get enough the first time around and went for that renewal process. So again, still a rigorous process, not quite as much time, but still significant in terms of their renewal. So Monica Enquist, Bo Hansen, Kelly Jagger, Anna Jaross, Danielle Lancaster, Evelyn Kowalski, Elizabeth Metcalf, Carla Nelson, James Palmer, or Ryan Palmer, Linda Thompson, Cassie Wesson Mast, and Brian Rowley. And so these are pictures of our board certified teachers, and we want to thank them for their commitment and their work supporting our kids and making themselves better for our whole district.
The next item on the agenda is public comment. The board welcomes the public to the business meetings of the board and encourages community engagement. The board dedicates 30 minutes at these meetings to hear from the public. Currently, there are 3 options to submit public comment. The first is in person, and you can give in-person public comment by pre-registering by emailing Diane Jenkins at djenkins@lwsd.org by 1 p.m. on the day of the meeting to attend the board meeting to provide public comment. In addition, you can submit written public comments by emailing Diane at djenkins@lwsd.org by 3 p.m. on the date of the meeting. The comments are compiled, distributed to the board, and posted on the district's website. You can also provide televised public comment by requesting a Microsoft Teams link to join the meeting, in which you can provide live televised public comment. And to do so, you also email Diane Jenkins at djenkins@lwsd.org. The board limits public comments to 3 minutes per person. There is a red light, or green light, yellow light, red light. I think the yellow light shines when there's 1 minute left, and then the red light when your time is up. At this time, we have Adam Coleman, who has signed up to speak on start times. Mr. Coleman, will you please come forward? Thank you.
There you go. Can you hear me now? Yeah, so I got off mute, that one, everyone with Teams. First of all, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to take the time to address the board this evening. My name is Adam Coleman. I'm the father of a current sophomore at Redmond High School. First of all, I'd like to thank all the board for all that you do for our schools and for our students. To cut to the chase, I'm here to ask the board to reconsider the decision of the 2019 task force to retain a 7:30 start time at Redmond High School. I'd like to start just saying I agree with the mission and the vision that we have around having every student future ready for college, the global workforce and personal success, and for all the sort of facets for giving best educational outcomes. However, a 7:30 start time at Redmond High School is a significant break on achieving this for students attending the school. I believe there are three criteria for consideration in addition to what the 2019 task force looked at. One is the learning of the impact of a 9 a.m. start time during the COVID-19. And just as a quote from your own Pathway Forward survey, it's the only silver lining during the pandemic, was one comment from one parent. Evidence of poor sleep on well-being and educational outcomes. There's an additional study that happened after the decision was made by the National Institute of Health that looks directly at the impact of educational outcomes on poor sleep with teens. And lastly, the nature of, I actually study this at work, the nature of COVID-19 pandemic on the nature of work and how it will change the way that parents work and flexibility. This is not the case for every parent, I understand that, but I think it really requires some extra exploration as where that can help. I believe some of the other criteria that were put in place, that I didn't see the order effect of those things, but transportation, et cetera, are constraints that really are not reasons to, things to deal with and work with the focus being on the educational outcomes needed. Frankly, I wonder why Redmond High School is a special case compared to other schools in the district. My understanding, for example, if we look, by the way, at Seattle School District, they start at 9. And I believe Lake Washington School, you should correct me, starts at 8 a.m. Recent local feedback, looking at this, again, supports this. So 430 people have already signed a change.org petition I put together that asks Lake Washington School District to start Redmond High School at a later time. There's a link to that in the appendix of the paperwork I sent in. Secondly, I actually am a market researcher at Microsoft, so I looked at your own survey to do some analysis. The Pathways Forward survey shows the topic of a later start time in the 2 questions you ask have 4 comments separately in the top 10. So it's mentioned 4 times in both questions. That's 8 out of 20. That's 40%, whichever way you want to look at it. It's a lot. In addition to that, it's mentioned over 90 times. There are 90 entries about this, with later and start as word cloud words as 2 of the top level words in both of those. So, in closing, I'd like us all to consider this question. I'd love if you'd all take a moment to reflect what it would be like to have to start work every day at 7:30 in the morning, where someone is asking you to concentrate on new content and take notes when you are half asleep. How would most adults perform? I know I personally would not be at my best. So please make the right choice. Reconsider starting Redmond High School later for the good of the students' educational futures, their well-being, and for better results for the school and effectively educational outcomes for this school district. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Is there anyone else who would like to provide in-person public comment tonight who did not have the opportunity to sign up but would like to address the board? Okay. I see there are some folks waiting outside. Can we find out what's going on? Okay. Oh, hey, could you, if you wouldn't mind coming to the microphone. Oh, I'm sorry, you come on, just. There's four, I see 4 chairs.
Apologize for the registration business. Didn't know it was required.
Oh, not a problem.
My
If
name's
you-
Natalie Wells. I'm a co-president at Eastlake High School. And while this is a Redmond High School petition, I think it applies very well to all of the other schools. I'll just throw in the research that I'm sure was also listed in the petition that shows specifically, not just for adults having trouble at 7:30 in the morning, but very specifically for teens. If you look at, there's a book that, I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the author, called Why We Sleep, and it goes through it in very, very specific details. We can't get the kids to sleep earlier. Their circadian rhythms have changed. And all we do by waking up that early in the morning is we harm learning, we harm their mental health. And I understand that it's a difficult logistical problem, and I understand there's an issue with buses and an issue with sports. I would love to see the very specific details of that because we have so many people passionate about it. Maybe they'll have ideas. Maybe we'll be able to solve the problems that prevent us from doing it together and then allow for these later start times. So please consider that. Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight. We're good. Is there anyone else in attendance who would like to provide public comment tonight? Okay. There are, for the folks who weren't able to sign up, but, okay. We have some chairs in the front if you would like to stay.
Join us.
You don't have to. Okay.
We're not letting you out of the building.
Okay, thank you, everyone who provided public comment tonight. Really appreciate it. The next item on the agenda is approval of the May 17, 2021 consent agenda. I will now entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Move approval. Second.
Been moved by Director Carlson, seconded by Director Stewart, that we approve the consent agenda as presented. Dr. Holman, will you please pull the board?
Director Sage?
Yes.
Director Bleasner?
Yes.
Director Carlson?
Yes.
Vice President Stewart?
Yes.
And President La Liberty?
Yes. Dr. Holman, will you please summarize the donations?
Absolutely. Tonight on the in the board's packet, you'll see our PTSA continues to provide supports for our schools and students, totaling over $15,000, and from private sources over $2,500, for a grand total of $18,165. It is with great appreciation that we accept these donations. We put them to great use to support our students, our schools, and the programs and services offered.
Thank you. Okay, we have 3 items on the non-consent agenda tonight. The first is an overview of the budget and legislative update. Dr. Holman, you get us started.
Yes, and as Associate Superintendent Barbara Posthumus comes up to the podium, just want to recognize that the first two agenda items, typically the board discusses in study session. Since we did not have a study session tonight, we did move those both to the board meeting, seeing that they are both very important topics. And so first topic that Barbara will discuss with the board is the overview of budget and legislative update. And this really is talking about the process to adopt a formal budget that we know occurs in August, but also now that the legislative session is over, just some of the impacts and outcomes of this legislative session, knowing that the board has a legislative platform, and so really looking at, with some of those platform items, what were some of the outcomes and impacts. Barbara?
Thank you, Dr. Holman. So I'll just get started. And so first I want to just remind the board and the community that every year we develop a budget that is aligned with our strategic plan and our 5 goal areas of academic success, well-being, community engagement, excellent staff, and effective use of resources. So our board policy drives the organization. The results policies are organizational outcomes, and our operational expectations set the parameters for the district. So just a reminder also of our mission. Each student will graduate prepared to lead a rewarding and responsible life as a contributing member of our community and greater society. And for the 21-22 school year, we're focusing on 3 areas to meet our benchmarks, and that's our multi-tiered systems of support, inclusive practices, and equity. So our budget cycle is an annual cycle, and every year the first thing we do is project enrollment, and then we monitor our actual enrollment. In the fall, the enrollment is a key driver of our state funding and our revenues and our expenditures. And then in the middle of the year, we are monitoring our budget, providing mid-year projections. We've shared projections in prior study sessions and board meetings for this year. And then we begin, and then the legislature is in session. This year was at the biennial legislative session. They just completed that in April, and that also drives our known impacts for the next year's budget. And so at this time of year, we're beginning our budget preparations. And at the same time, we don't just look at 1 year. When we prepare our budget, we actually do a multi-year projection so that decisions we're making today, we want to make sure we know how that's going to affect us in the long term. And then we have ongoing and monitoring and reporting of our budget. So our overarching interests in our budget is fiscal responsibility. We want to make sure we have healthy organizational culture. We want to be transparent to our community and our taxpayers. We want to balance the needs of the organization. We want to make sure we're effective and efficient, and then provide clarity. Mike Van Orden shared some of these slides in his strategic planning at the May 3rd study session. So part of our budget planning work is supporting our strategic work. And again, that is not just funding, but time and people. And that drives our successful outcomes. So this is our budget timeline, or a short summary of our budget timeline. So in April, we began strategic planning. We provided OSPI, or an overview of the student academic and recovery plan. We developed surveys for our parents. This month, we are analyzing those surveys. We're identifying our strategic work. And then we use a district representative group, a leadership team, to review those items and make and provide feedback. And then we also, this year is unique due to COVID, we have to approve a recovery plan. So you're going to hear about that next from Mike. And then in June, we're finalizing our work items. beginning to plan for August. We're submitting our academic recovery plan, and then we provide a draft budget to the board at the last board meeting in June, and that begins our public feedback period. And then in August, the board holds a public hearing and provides final approval of the budget. And again, this timeline is slightly compressed versus last year due to preparing for in-person learning and our recovery plan requirements. So this is a similar slide. This is, again, the timeline on how we, what we're doing in each of these months to identify the time, people, and funding needed to accomplish our priorities. So our budget, when we look at our budget categories, we break them into three main categories: organizational capacity, what are the resources we need to maintain the desired performance levels, and those can be legal requirements and growth due to maintaining our service levels. And then there's our strategic outcomes, things needed to meet our goals and objectives. And as I mentioned, our key focus areas are MTSS, equity, and support for inclusive practices. And then our contractual handbooks and contractual labor negotiations also drive our budget. And so we have collective bargaining agreements, 2 that are open for next fall, and then 3 that we will be working with, or 3 bargained agreements, and then 2 handbooks that we will be working with next year. So I'll move into kind of our legislative update. In the fall that we provided, the board worked together to create priorities and did develop those in the fall and developed a legislative platform. And those align with our strategic plan. And then you as Cassandra, our board representative, and district staff met in December and January with our legislators. And so now that the session's finished, I just want to give you an update. Again, aligned with our strategic plan and our mission and vision. So the legislative platform this year that was developed was broken into 3 main areas: vital, urgent, and ongoing. So in the vital category was funding for special education programs and services, ensuring that SEB, our new benefits program, was fully funded, social emotional learning, providing additional support for counseling and other social emotional learning enhancements, and then continuing to make sure we can attract, recruit, and retain high-quality staff. So you'll see as we go through the presentation some red X's or green checks. And red X's means the legislature didn't really hit the mark. So when it came to fully funding the cost of special education, no additional funding was provided. And so our special education program continues to be significantly underfunded by about $19 million from the state. And our levies, our local EP&O education programs and operations levy provides the local funding to support that program. Additional funds for social emotional learning. The legislative budget did provide a 0.5 FTE counselor at high poverty elementary schools, and that's defined by the state as a school that has more than 50% poverty levels. And Lake Washington does not benefit because none of our schools have that high percentage of poverty. So we are not benefiting from that. There were no funding for pilot programs. There were some minor grants, but really they provide more professional development without additional funding. So SEL remains underfunded by the state as well. So in the excellent staff category, no change to funding or eligibility for SEB. That new program that they implemented provided enhancements that were not funded, and so it continues to remain underfunded by the state. In the attract, recruit, and retain staff, No changes to certification systems, so making it easier to be certified from out of state, so that no changes there. Annually, the state determines compensation impacts, and so they do fund a 2% inflationary adjustment, or COLA, for next year. But that funding is only provided to the extent the state prototypical model is funded. So most districts around the state hire more staff than the state actually funds. And so for every 1% state-funded COLA increase, our district needs to actually provide $1 million more than that in local funding. And again, our education programs and operations budget pays for that. And then Seb, there were premium changes, some decreases in the first fiscal year, or first year of the biennium, and then increases in the second year of the biennium. Again, the state funds their funded portion for staff, and then the district has to fund the local costs of those programs. So in the urgent category, this was due to the impact of COVID. We asked the legislature to provide, to hold us harmless for the losses in enrollment and in transportation, and to ensure that we were, reimbursed for all of our costs associated with remote learning and COVID. So in this area, the legislature did provide additional funding to stabilize our enrollment and transportation losses. So this year, with our significant enrollment decline, they provided partial stabilization of funds, and then our transportation losses as well. They provided some of the losses that we incurred. They are maintaining our district's levy capacities due to enrollment loss, because your education programs and operations levy is based on your enrollment. So they're making sure districts don't decrease because of that. For the 21-22 school year, they're providing a full hold harmless for transportation. Which means they are going to provide at least the amount of funding that you received in the 19-20 school year. So we anticipate continued enrollment declines in transportation next year, so that'll be helpful. We've shared at prior board meetings a lot of the ESSER funds, and our district has spent a significant amount of money for remote learning and the start of school year, more than what our ESSER funds were provided. And in addition, because the ESSER funds are based on your free and reduced percentages and based on the Title I formula, our district received approximately $400 a pupil, where many of our neighbors of the similar size, or not neighbors, but other districts across the state, they received $3,000 to $4,000 per student. And so what the state did was provide assistance to fund this inequity up to $500. So even though other districts were getting $3,000 to $4,000, they gave us the difference up to $500. So for us, it was another $84 per pupil. So some more funds, but we're still not getting what many other districts are receiving. And it does not cover all our costs. And all of these hold harmless funds are one-time funds, so they aren't able to be used to cover ongoing expenditures. So, and then the third part of our legislative platform was ongoing issues that we've talked with the legislature each year in the areas of technology. Again, currently districts receive minimal funding for technology, and so asking for those funds, school construction funding, and then simple majority for school bonds. So you'll see the first item, increased funding for technology. I gave it a green check and a little red X because it's just a little bit. They provided $25 per pupil in the second year of the biennium for broadband connectivity needs of family. families. So our technology area remains significantly underfunded by the state. We spend about $25 million a year in technology, and the state funds about $4 million. We use our capital projects levy that our voters vote on every 4 years to cover that shortfall. So the laptops alone that we had to buy this year were $3 to $4 million. So then the second area, the school construction funding assistance, those we get funding when our community passes a bond and funds construction for new schools. We do not receive any state construction assistance for that because the formulas are based on pre-1979 standards. And so we've been asking for many years for those formulas to be updated, and still no change. So we actually don't get funded from the state when growth occurs. The state will give us a small percentage of construction for when we rebuild an aging school. So they will provide funding to rebuild aging schools, but they do not provide any funding right now. We're not eligible for funding for new buildings for growth. And that's a significant challenge in a district that's growing by 31% in the last 10 years. So the last item was simple majority for bonds. Right now, bonds to construct schools, you have to have a supermajority or a 60% approval rating rather than a 50% approval rating. And we've been asking for years to have that changed to be 50% like our levies, and no movement on that in this legislative session. So the last two slides are just some bills, some of the many bills that were passed. We were told at the beginning of the legislative session that due to COVID, there would not be the activity in bills that normally happens in a normal legislative session. Well, they still did a lot. So there were still bills that we were not expecting. But so I shared some of these with you in previous study sessions. But they passed a bill on paid family medical leave, and that expands the program, the new paid family medical leave. And so that has potential to add costs due to staff leaves. And we have to, hire subs when staff go on leave. The lead testing in drinking water changes the testing and remediation requirements. Again, our district already has a very robust lead testing program, but this bill implements additional requirements on top of that and will most likely add costs related to remediation. The next bill, 1323, actually the long-term care tax got passed in the last biennium, but they then added a bill this year to provide clarity on exemptions. But the state has implemented a new statewide employee payroll tax to provide for a long-term care program. So that's a new tax. It's going to be implemented January of 22. The next bill is 1332, and that allows deferral of property tax payments for businesses that lost revenue. We don't know the impact specifically to us, but it could reduce our levy revenues short term because it allows them to delay their property tax payments. The next bill is positive for our students who are on reduced price lunch. Previously, they had to pay 40 cents for their meals if they were on reduced price lunch. This allows their meals to be free, and then the state will reimburse the district. The state will reimburse the school districts for that 40 cents. And then the last bill on this page is 5425, and it extends the timeline for unemployment insurance. Now, while our district did not lay off any employees, potentially there's employees that could add costs related to unemployment claims because the state does allow for people who had reduced hours to claim unemployment. So the last three bills are one on safety security and one on counseling programs and equity training. And they really just require new policies and reporting, and the counseling requires a development of a new model. Equity training, last year's budget bill actually said one of the state-funded teacher extra days, they call them LID days, was to be focused on equity, and this bill expands on this. We don't know yet the budget impact. Matt Gillingham, our Director of Student Services, and his team, most of these fall under his area, will be analyzing the requirements of each of these bills and determining next steps. So that is the end of my presentation on that. Any questions?
That is a better summary than I could have done. Thank you, Barbara.
Any other questions? Director Stewart?
Barbara, could we go back, I think it's one slide back, to the, maybe it's even further. It's the student lunches, and yeah, I see the next one, the bottom one, but it seems like there was something else. The PEBT, is that on here? Or that's federal?
The EBT, there wasn't a bill related to that. That's more of a
Okay.
federal program, and that relates to actually when lunch isn't provided. It's called the PEBT program, will provide funding. So it's only when lunch isn't provided. And so since we've been back to school and lunch is provided daily, then that isn't an issue while we're in school.
Well, we're in school, but when we were out of school remotely, what was the impact of that on families?
So families can apply for the PEBT program, and they were able to get a card with funding to help them support them for meals.
In all four of our learning,
So we have
paths?
some schools that are not eligible for our National School Lunch Program, and so they were not eligible for the PEBT card. So we have some of our one high school, and I think 2 choice schools. So
So if we have poor students in those schools, they're just SOL.
I know we have reached out. There are some, we've heard of some with questions, and they're not, because they're in person now, and so they're getting their meals.
Right, but for the time frame that they weren't in person, those families then had a deficit spending on their family meals, correct?
They were not eligible for the PEBT card, but the district was still providing grab-and-go meals for all families during the last summer and school year.
Okay.
And we have reached out to the families that we're aware of and are providing them support as needed.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? No. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I don't think you're going very far. Next item on the non-consent agenda is an overview of the capital facilities plan.
Yes, and as the board knows, this is an annual process where we adopt a new capital facilities plan. It's interesting. We are the fastest growing school district in King County, and so the update to our capital facility plan is a critical part of our ongoing growth. The plan identifies capacity needs. The capacity needs for Lake Washington are significant, and so the plan that we have proposed that the board will take action on at our next meeting does have some significant changes and differences. Those differences and changes are really responsive to the needs of our school district being located in the most rapidly growing area in King County, and knowing that the space considerations and needs of our students are real. So with that, I'll pass it over to Barbara.
Thank you very much. And again, this is also something we would normally share in a study session, but because we didn't have a study session today, we're just doing the preview at the board meeting tonight. So So tonight I'm just going to present the history of school impact fees, why we do the capital facility plan, the impact fee calculations, and the process for approval. So first I will talk about the purpose of and history of school impact fees. So we are required each year to complete a 6-year capital facility plan, which establishes a basis for impact fees. And impact fees are, the purpose of collecting them is to provide a portion of the support for the growth in our community. And all of the plan components drive the fee calculation. So impact fees are assessed by local governments against new development projects, single-family, multifamily housing projects. They're not intended to pay for 100% of the costs of the new facilities, but provide a portion of the costs incurred to serve that new development. And so when we grow, when homes are built, that brings in more students to the district, and then that creates capacity needs at our schools, and we need to construct new buildings. So they can only be used to fund facilities directly associated with the new development. They can't be used to correct existing deficiencies. They're collected through our local cities and counties, and they're based on the expected impact of each housing unit. And we have to spend them within 10 years of collecting. And that has not been an issue in our district because we are growing so fast. So the inputs into the impact fee calculation are the number of students, we call it the student generation rate, the number of students that we get from each single family or multifamily housing unit, and we do that on a 5-year history. And then the cost of, expected cost of school facilities, and based on recent construction costs. And then there's non-impact fee revenues associated with the project. And there's a 50% reduction in the formula that is required as part of the formula. So we first determine a per student cost of construction by each level, elementary, middle, and high, along with the average number of students generated from each housing unit. So we take the cost to construct a needed school divided by the number of students, the capacity of that school, and that gets you your construction cost per student. And then the construction cost per student multiplied by the student generation rate gives you an impact cost per housing unit. And then that fee, did I go backwards? No. And then that fee calculation, we also look at the cost impact is reduced by other funding sources, which include the state construction funding assistance, so credits from the state, and then credits from property taxes, so our bond tax rate. So this is a history. As I mentioned, impact fees pay a portion of our capacity project, and this table shows you the total that we have collected over 4 years. So the average each year is around, anywhere from 3 to 7 million per year, and then so in total in the district, and then each jurisdiction, again, it ranges anywhere from 500,000 to the highest I think was in City of Redmond back in 1718 of 2.7 million. So that's what's collected. Again, does not pay for a whole building, just pays for a portion of any construction project that we have. So specifically for Lake Washington School District, our plan this year, some highlights that we made some changes to the plan. We improved the readability of the document. We were doing a lot of lists. We have a lot of projects, and so we turned those lists into tables. Our school construction costs for elementary, middle, and high school were updated based on the Facility Advisory Committee recommendations. If you remember last year at this time, we had left those projects the same until those recommendations were finalized. They were finalized in January, so we updated the projects, and that's shown in the financing plan in both Appendix B and Table 6. Our site acquisition costs are included for anticipated elementary needs. And so that is new this year, given that we know we have projects coming up in the future that will need land associated with them. And then due to COVID-related enrollment disruptions, we did this year use our 2020 student generation rates in Appendix D because we knew that the 2021 student enrollment would not be reflective of the reality of the students that we're housing in these developments. So the impact fee calculations, you can see that for 2021, the draft plan includes a single-family fee of $18,997, a multifamily fee of $3,510. And even with the increase in the multifamily, we have one of the lowest multifamily impact fees of the King County districts. And this chart kind of shows you where we are as far as single family. These are last year's fees. Every district right now is drafting their 2021 capital facilities plan, so I won't have that information for another couple weeks. But based on last year's fees, our single family fee was the third highest, but our multifamily fee was one of the lowest, and it still will be even with that fee change. So just the timeline and approval is we've prepared the draft plan in April and May. We are required to notify the public on May 13th and give a 2-week period. It's called a SEPA notification. And so we've done that, and then there's a public comment period. And then the King County School Technical Review Committee meets on May 26th. And they review the draft capital facility plans from King County districts, and we have to submit all of our information. And then the board takes action on our plan on June 7th. And then King County the committee meets with all the King County school districts, and Brian Buck, our Executive Director of Support Services, will represent us at that meeting. And then they review the capital facilities plans for compliance, and then they do a final adoption of all the plans in the fall. And then each of our cities, once King County adopts the plans, each of our cities, they approve the fees as part of the city process, because they are the actual ones that collect the fees, and that happens in October and November. And then the impact fees will take place in effect once the cities do their process. They go into effect of January 1 of 22. And that is the end of that presentation. Yes.
Have we, oh, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Director Sayes, then Director Stewart.
Have we ever had the county not approve our impact fee structure?
Not that I'm aware of.
Have other districts in our area, do you know?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you.
Director Stewart?
The growth of new multifamily homes, or for that matter, single-family homes, is very visible in showing us that we're growing. But I wonder, can you tell us, or can you have any idea of how much of our growth actually comes from new construction as opposed to families moving into the empty nester houses? Because I've noticed in a lot of the neighborhoods, folks, all of a sudden, when they're empty nesters, all of a sudden they're replaced by families with 4 or 5 kids, or 3 kids. And all of a sudden, cha-ching, that comes up, and there's really no way of compensating for that, if you will. Do we have a feel for the new construction versus replacement, if you will, residences?
Yeah, we have, what we do track is, again, in order to get the student generation rates, we do track the new developments that have been built in the last 5 years and calculate how many students are coming out of those new developments. I'd have to compare, I don't have off the top of my head for you, how that compares to our actual growth that year, for example. So we don't have the statistics, and it's hard to, right, we don't have data when students enroll. Do you live in a new home or did you just move to the area and which type of home you built? So we don't have that type of statistics of when we enroll students. And so it's hard to have that, it's hard to get that information.
I'm just asking because our neighborhood is probably 15 to 18 years old. And in the last 2 years, I'd say about half of those homes turned over, generating a lot of kids on a lot of those bicycles. And so I know we got a lot more students coming out of there than we had when we moved in. And so I'm wondering how well we can capture, or is it possible to capture those numbers so we know which way we're growing?
Barbara, is that a question that we could ask our demographer group that we work
that'd be
with?
great.
Because,
Yeah.
you know, the turnover of a neighborhood, there's a lot to it, and I just wonder if they have any history that they could apply to any of our neighborhoods as they're thinking about that.
Yeah, we can certainly ask them what the
Whatever
best
source.
way, yeah,
Thank you.
yep.
Go ahead. Director Bleasner?
Yes, I'd just like to follow up on the question. You had mentioned that the recommendations and the buildings on here were based off the long-term facilities recommendations. We have acquired the land of the 25 acres up in the Redmond area, and that wasn't known at the time that those recommendations came through. So how is that playing out in this capital facilities plan? Because there is the capacity of other things at that location. I'm also looking at the table, trying to understand where that 40 million that was spent on the purchase of that land is falling out through here, and if it can yet, as it's
Yeah.
not defined.
What you're correct, is that the land was purchased after our facility advisory committee did their work, and the purchase of the land drove the cost. That's how we determined the cost in the formula. The cost per acre is a required input for the formula. And that informs, though, the need. We know that there are projects in that the advisory committee recommended that we still will need additional land for. And if those projects are also, if any of the projects will be placed on the current property that we have purchased, then that is why we're using that land cost in the formula. Does that make sense? So the financing table, table 6, includes, let's pull it out here. So we include we include funds for future property needs for the elementary schools that are on that plan.
Right, so I guess my question is how flexible is this plan as you go forward? I know it's the capital facilities plan, and these are only the recommendations. If the plan is changed as to, as going through this, looking at the enrollment and what's needed, it's a comprehensive high school that gets decided that could be built there instead.
Yeah.
How does that impact, and is it still feasible within this environment of how these recommendations are laid out?
Yeah, so that's why we update this plan on an annual basis, because if things change, again, the plan is based on what we anticipate today, and we have reasonable anticipation that these projects will be, built in the time frame. But we do come back each year and update those plans.
So it can still be adapted as it goes through and being looked at as it goes
Absolutely.
through. Perfect, thanks.
Director Carlson?
I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the table on slide 13 and trying to find rhyme or reason in comparison with the neighbors. Sorry. For example, Tahoma charges 1/3 as much as we do for single family and about the same as we do for multifamily. And at the same time, Issaquah charges roughly what we do for single family and charges 4 times as much as we do for multifamily.
Yep.
And finally, as far as I can tell, Bellevue School District doesn't charge impact fees at all. So
Correct.
could you give me some explanation of why these numbers have no correlation with our neighbors?
Yes. So we've talked about Issaquah for the last couple years. Issaquah has a much higher student generation rate in their multifamily development. And so that drives, the student generation rate is the key driver for the impact fees. And so when you compare Issaquah's plan to our plan, their student generation rate for their multifamily units is higher, which drives their fee up. And Bellevue has chosen not to collect impact fees. So they have just chosen not to do that.
And the other component is multifamily could be a one-bedroom, apartment, a two-bedroom, a three-bedroom,
Right.
a four-bedroom, depending on what's being built, will depend on the student generation.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was not so much asking for my purposes, but for the general audience who might be looking at this table and thinking these numbers are completely divorced from reality.
Right.
And it's for every district, there's a different equation. Ours are usually multifamily where they're multi-story, one family per unit going
Yeah.
up.
The equation-
Many fewer students than if you have adjacent townhouses.
Yeah. The equation is
so-
the same for all districts. It's the inputs that can be different.
Right.
So the student generation, the
Which is-
bond rates, the construction costs, so are
And I
very
was
different.
pretty sure when I
in-
read this, I skimmed through this ahead of you, but where's our student generation rates? They should be in this presentation. I was looking for that
yeah.
slide and not seeing it, and it's kind of a critical thing to explain that our students from multifamily, we're getting about as fifth as many students per multifamily unit as we do for single family. And to just show people that would at least give them some sense that these numbers mean something rather than that they're randomly pulled out of the air.
They're in the plan itself, but yes, I can
Yeah.
put them in the presentation.
So,
They didn't
anyway.
change from last year because of our unique, normally I'm showing you how they compare to prior years, but they didn't change because of, we continue to use the 2020 student generation numbers.
And for Bellevue, I assume this is the fact that they don't collect these impact fees has something to do with their tax base being a very different thing.
They have a different
Individual
tax
people
base.
versus-
They have been able to pass bond measure. I don't think they've
Had any.
failed a bond
Yeah.
measure, so they've been able to continually pass bond measures.
Right,
So
thanks.
I'm looking at last year's.
they also
capital
haven't
facility
grown
plan.
as much as we have either. So,
A new single-family home generates 0.37 elementary students, 0.153 middle school students, and 0.147 high school students, so about 0.67 students per single family. A multifamily unit generates 0.15 students.
Yeah, exactly.
So-
It should be about a quarter to a fifth.
That's right.
Given
Yep.
the numbers that we're asking for.
yeah.
I don't have a question, more of a comment. I just wanted to say I support the inclusion of land costs in this calculation. I mean, the fact that we just had to spend $40 million on land tells you how significant of a component that's going to be for building new schools in this area, not just today, but for the future. I mean, the fact that we were able to find land at that price was extraordinary. So I think I think it's appropriate and reasonable to include that as as part of the input. Any other questions or comments? Great.
Okay, thank you. And so
Thank
we
you.
will be bringing back the draft capital facility plan on June 7th for final action. All right.
Thank you. All right, next we have, the last item on the non-consent agenda is a presentation on the academic and student well-being recovery plan. Dr. Holman, can you please get us started?
Yes, and as Associate Superintendent Mike Van Orden comes to the podium, we are bringing to you tonight a resolution for board action based on the requirement to adopt a recovery plan based on OSPI and the federal government's requirements. And in doing so, we have also layered this into our strategic planning and planning for the 21-22 school year. because a lot of the work that's referenced within the plan really is ongoing work that we have had and also interest that we've had in terms of implementation for student supports, knowing that as students transition back from the 2021 school year, there are unique needs and we need to be responsive to those. So, Mike?
Thank you, Dr. Holman. As I start tonight, I want to give you a little context about the OSPI Academic and Student Wellbeing Recovery Plan, what it is and what it's not. The way I'm reading it and the way we're reading it is that it really is a way to ensure that schools across the state have a threshold of specific assessments, because we need assessments to determine how our students are doing, and specific strategies. But in terms of, and what it's not, is what you might typically think of in a plan: timelines, budget, cost, personnel. It really is a way for OSPI to ensure that there's this threshold. For us, as Dr. Holman was mentioning, the next step that we need to follow through with is then incorporating this into our larger strategic planning efforts. So what we're reporting tonight and what you're voting on tonight is the OSPI recovery plan with some very specific notations and requirements, and in some ways limiting to some of the things we're going to do. So for example, there's a very generic description of, as a strategy, professional learning, but it doesn't ask you to identify what types of professional learning as an example. That work will come with our strategic planning efforts, and so I'm going to walk you through the OSPI recovery plan requirements and the components of that, but then at the end really talk about how we're going into much more detail in terms of the specific plans, the concrete actions, the accountability measures, as was mentioned at our last board meeting, will be built into a planning process that will then be shared with you as we're talking about our strategic planning efforts and our budget, as Barbara Posthumus was mentioning. So just as a review, at our last meeting, we shared with you that the recovery plan is really a result of a new federal requirement that's tied to our ESSER funding, our relief funding. And so OSPI has taken that federal guidance and translated it into the recovery plan template that we'll be sharing with you. Washington State also has requirements for us to consider. And so Washington State then designates the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction to implement or carry out the plan. And so OSPI also had, as a result of reading through the legislation, the ability to add some additional requirements beyond what was identified in the federal requirements. And so one of those was the use of an equity analysis tool, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. Board approval, which is what we're here for tonight, and then public posting on the district website, and we'll talk about that as well. So as I mentioned, there are two components. The first was the equity analysis tool. So we reviewed a number of different tools. OSPI provided us with some resources. We also looked at some ourselves. For example, we looked at a tool from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, the Washington Alliance for Better Schools. OSPI also gave us some neighboring districts' equity analysis tools. And the one that, as we were reviewing, seemed to be the most aligned with our efforts was a tool used by Seattle Public Schools. It was developed there and then refined over time. It comes with a planning guide. And essentially what the equity analysis tool does, it takes you through a series of questions to think about things like the impact of the actions that you're considering, whether or not you're engaging stakeholders, analyzing data, considering the negative impacts or unintended consequences of actions you're taking. And so this is a tool that we'll use not only for the analysis of our recovery planning efforts, but our larger strategic efforts, and also just decisions that we're making at the district and school level. So we see it as a valuable tool, and we're grateful that this was added as one of the requirements. In addition, as I mentioned, one of the requirements was to post the plan on our website. The very specific by the book requirement was following board approval, it's posted, and there's an opportunity. Based on our information that we shared at the study session last time, there was an interest in having that up earlier and gathering some feedback on that. And so we tied that draft recovery plan to a thought exchange survey that asked questions related specifically to academics and student well-being. And then we incorporated some of that feedback into the recovery planning items that we identified, but we'll also be incorporating that into our larger strategic planning efforts. So as I mentioned, there's also district requirements, and so we have a requirement to submit this plan by June 1st for access to, it has to be approved for access to our ESSER 3 funds. If we don't hit all the marks on the plan, they will let us know, and then we have an opportunity to make adjustments and resubmit. So as I mentioned, We, as part of the recovery planning process, want to make sure that we are thinking globally. And at the same time, I think I mentioned last week too, we were notified of this plan about a month ago, a little bit less than a month ago. And so the ability to turn around an in-depth analysis for a very solid recovery plan and to meet the requirements of OSPI, there's a tighter timeline. So we're also thinking about this, and I want to just keep reminding folks, we're thinking about this in the larger context of our strategic planning efforts. But very specifically, as we were looking at some of the specific student needs that were related to our recovery efforts, there were some key indicators that did stand out, and these are just some samples of that. So one example, and these are both full credit for students in the first semester. So last year in the first semester, we were pre-COVID. This year in the first semester, we were right in the middle of COVID. And so we're looking at how students' ability to get their credits that they need to be on track for graduation were the same and different before and after, but also by different group. And so one of the requirements of the plan is to identify specific groups. And so American Indian and Alaska Native, Black African American, Hispanic Latinx are some of the groups that we know we need to, and we have been working on as having supports and changing our system to meet the needs of our students. You'll also see for special education, EL, and low income, there's, well, with the exception of EL, there's a slight difference in the way that students were able to earn credits. As we've also shared in the past, our graduation rates are a key indicator and a key metric of how we're doing as a system pre-K all the way through 12th grade. And so if we don't have good literacy programs in the elementary school and good academic instruction throughout, and we're not taking care of students' mental health and well-being, then we're not going to get the same graduation outcomes. And we are seeing declines for some of our students. And so again, strong indicators that we need to look at our system and look at ourselves and talk about how are we fixing our system so that our students can have access to the resources and supports and opportunities they need to be successful. And so part of our recovery planning efforts are looking at coming out of COVID, what do we need to do, but also longer term to address these systemic issues that have been in our system and in systems nationally for many, many years. We see similar patterns for our special education, multilingual learners, and for students who are on free and reduced price lunch. So again, those were a couple key metrics. We need to also go deeper into very specific indicators, literacy, well-being, and that we'll be working on as part of our larger strategic planning efforts. But again, it's part of the recovery planning requirements to identify specific groups so that you can be thinking about supports short and long term. So as we mentioned last time, we also have a requirement to post our recovery plan. And again, it was a very generic requirement, allowed the opportunity for input, but again, based on feedback we received at our last board meeting, we took a thought exchange survey that had questions that were specifically related to academics and well-being. They were distributed as 2 separate surveys. And then we asked folks to give us your ideas about what's needed for your kids as you're coming in. We asked families that, we asked community members, administrators, and students. And so for the academic question that was delivered on the first day, there were almost 2,000 participants. We also note that this was made available to folks in multiple languages, and we did have families that took advantage of that multiple language to be able to access the survey. You can also see we had about 3,800 individual ideas that were shared, and then those were ranked, so 81,000 rankings. Then you start to see patterns, and one of our public comment speakers tonight mentioned this. For our well-being, this was the second survey, slightly lower participation. Our sense is probably that folks took that first survey and the second survey maybe weren't quite the same level of interest or attention or time. And so slightly different, but still 1,400 thoughts, almost 1,500, and 35,000 rankings. So there's a number of ways to parse this data, and we are looking at it, but 2 that were, one that was very intriguing to us was this idea, Thought Exchange will identify themes in the data. And so for academics, for example, student learning, but also interestingly, mental health came up in the academic question. Staff supports, parent engagement, and I'll talk about some of the things that were underneath each of these. And so what you can see by group is groups that rated those as a higher priority or a higher score or in more agreement with that. And so for example, students rank those top 5 as a high priority, and so there's a 1 to 5 rating, and so 4 is on the high end of agreement. Similarly, for well-being, you see mental health supports, parent engagement, safety, staff support. And again, all of these have multiple things underneath them. So for example, as we looked at that theme of student learning, one of the things that came up, as you probably would imagine, is in-person instruction. Multiple times, came up many, many times. Elementary literacy and math, because there were a lot of ideas around that idea of concern that students maybe haven't had as much opportunity to make as much progress as they would in person. Extra help for students who need it, again, was a high comment. Hands-on learning was interesting, and we're thinking that is probably because kids have been at home, and so classes like science and career and technical education and the arts, where they had lots of hands-on experiences, are not there anymore. And so there was a high interest in getting back to that hands-on learning, also closing opportunity gaps. In addition, in that one, as well as many of the others, the idea that was mentioned earlier of start times did come up frequently as well. Mental health, there was a statement that I think captured many of the questions. There were many of the things you can imagine, mental health support, counselors, things like that. But one of the things that stood out and why we saw it in both areas was the idea that academics are important, but you also need to emphasize social mental health. And really the idea is that you're thinking about how those are connected. And we're going to talk about our key initiative to address that a little bit later. The staff supports were really around professional learning and making sure that staff members were equipped to address any learning gaps, address the variability of student needs. Our students will be returning in many different states and will need extra support depending on what their conditions were like during COVID and the experience they had during our remote learning. But another one that came up was the idea of rigor and challenge. We want our kids to get back into all those great opportunities we had before COVID. And then finally, there was one that was really interesting to me, parent engagement. I was thinking, well, what do I think of as parent engagement? But a theme that came up and ideas that came up frequently was that idea of being connected to their students and how their students are doing in school and having clear two-way communication. And oftentimes during COVID, there was sometimes feeling like there maybe have been a gap there. So I don't know how my student's performing, and it's hard to get information, or grading and reporting was just more challenging than it was in normal times. And again, that's something that our parents were saying that would help me to be more engaged in my students' life. Now, there's more ideas underneath these, and you saw there were even more themes than these four, but these were typically the highest rated themes that came up. So, as I mentioned, we then have a responsibility to create a recovery plan that's submitted to OSPI. And so, again, just want to be really clear, this is a very prescriptive checklist kind of plan that needs to be submitted. And you aren't given the opportunity to expand and say, okay, professional learning is all these things. You get the opportunity to check a box, professional learning. And so what we were required to do is identify assessments. They refer to them as diagnostic assessments, but we also know we have screening assessments to assess all of our students when they return. We have assessments that are measuring ongoing how students are doing, and then we have summative assessments at the end. So we have those built in as well, and so those are identified in the plan. And then also strategies that are available to all students, and then strategies that are available to the groups that we've identified as needing additional support. And again, you're checking boxes and identifying groups. So it's not as if you're putting down like a long narrative and timelines and budget and all of that. So just some examples of some of the assessments and supports that we are indicating in our plan that we have in place or will have in place. And so a number of assessments. We have a new assessment that we're using for literacy and math called FAST that is K-8. And so this was our first year of implementation, and we're now in a good place to be using that next year to, again, screen all of our students and then assess their progress as they're working through to make sure that they're on grade level standards, because our goal is to make sure that our kids are hitting those standards throughout the year, and not necessarily to go back and make up everything they've lost, because then you're not necessarily teaching them what they need to have to be successful in their grade level. So our FAST assessment really does allow us to measure standard versus grade. We also have some measures that are classroom-based measures that are used in our special education program for kids who need specific targeted assessments. All of our curriculum comes with assessments as we adopt that curriculum. And then we have some of the assessments that are built into some of our online programs. So for example, Lexia has built-in assessments that drive the next instruction and the next task that comes up. We also have a program called ALEX, you may remember, and as part of our math program. So it's an adaptive program that assesses students and then gives them additional support or instruction based on those assessments. Obviously, our Smarter Balanced and WalkKids kindergarten. And then we'll have a new multilingual assessment next year called WIDA, and that will be helping us to identify needs for our English language learners. So then in terms of supports, we have a rich summer school offering this year. We have multiple departments that are working on summer school, including our special education, accelerated programs, general education, teaching and learning, college and career readiness. I think I mentioned special education as well. So they're offering multiple options, K-12 for our students. And so that really is kind of our bridge into the school year. When we move into the school year, you'll see this, the next item in both academics and behavior is really taking a system called multi-tiered system of supports. We've shared some summaries of this in the past. It's really how do you organize and coordinate all the different supports that are in your system. Make sure that every kid gets access to core academic and behavioral and social emotional instruction, and then kids who need more get the interventions and supports they need. And you have a system to monitor that. That system obviously includes data, includes teams at the school that are monitoring how kids are doing, and then targeting interventions and supports based on data. It also incorporates building in, for example, your equity team and talking how your equity team is supporting your school or your PBIS team. So really, it's the umbrella system that you use to bring all of these different supports together. So, as you look at further down the list, you think about grading practices and tutoring and inclusive practices. Really, all those are falling under an MTSS, and you have a team that's overseeing those and thinking about how they're all connected together. But again, specifically, some of the specific strategies we're looking at to target some of those needs we've been identifying. Obviously, K-4 literacy is always a high priority because we know literacy is such a foundational skill for students. Equitable grading practices is something that we're digging deeper into, particularly at the secondary level, where we know bias can get into grading. We know that can create systemic inequities for our students in terms of, we were talking about it earlier, I think, in terms of access to courses and colleges. We're also looking at tutoring options for our students. We've shared briefly, but we are working with the TIE Center out of the University of Minnesota to build inclusive practices into our instruction, and specifically in this case, Universal Design for Learning. And so they're giving us access to the CAST Center that really is the group that developed and provides support around inclusive practices. And so we'll be building those in not as a special education initiative, but as a general education initiative. We have transition supports for kids from kindergarten to elementary, or preschool to elementary to middle. And so those are things that we're building in and looking at. And then finally, as I mentioned, that idea of professional learning. And so there we're thinking about Universal Design for Learning and our math curriculum and marrying those together. Again, though, going back to what I was saying initially, all of these fit underneath an MTSS umbrella. You need to coordinate them so they're not all these different silos and you're trying to meet out different resources and supports without making sure they're really clearly connected and part of an integrated system. For student well-being, main assessments we have Panorama School Climate Survey. We're also using a system called the School-Wide Information System that allows schools to track multiple measures in the school and then see how they're related and connected. And then the WAKIDS also includes some well-being assessments. In terms of support, as I mentioned, that MTSS, we've talked about it in the past as academics and behavior, and we have MTSS and their A and B. We really are working now to start to integrate those together, and so all of our buildings next year will be working on creating leadership teams that oversee MTSS A and B, now really just one MTSS. There's social and emotional learning and mental health supports, and again, these are boxes we're checking on the OSPI recovery plan, but underneath these live much more specific actions and work that we have to do. And so we're right now evaluating a number of strategic proposals in terms of budget requests and use of time that will identify those specific supports. Extracurricular activities obviously connected, but we're also thinking not your typical sports, but programs for Black and African American students. We have ENAP for Native American and Indigenous students, and how do we build those extracurriculars so that they're really a core foundational support that's available to students. And then student voice and perception, we've shared our student advisory is really growing at as a result of some of our central leadership team members, and inclusive practices really does have an academic and well-being component. So again, these are supports that are identified as part of the recovery plan, and then there's also connected to our larger strategic efforts. So I'll wrap up tonight just by talking more specifically about these. Barbara and Dr. Holman mentioned earlier tonight, we're focusing really on 3 key initiatives. I think we've talked in the past, sometimes it's easy to have a things that are a mile wide and an inch deep, and really, if you focus on a few things and do them well, you have potential to have better implementation. So really, MTSS is the framework that binds many of our strategic supports together. And then we really do need to have a focus on inclusive practices that make sure that all of our students are welcome and able to access their home schools with general education, and they feel welcome in their schools and they feel like they're a part of it. And that goes for our students and our families and our staff. And then equity is a through line through all of our efforts. And so we're talking about how do we specifically focus in on not only professional learning and training, but start to think about how equity needs to be front and center as part of our MTSS work and part of our inclusive practices work. So we've shared briefly, and I think Barbara mentioned some of these tonight, we have a process to really start digging deeper into those strategic initiatives that have much more depth and content to them. So we're currently in a process of reviewing strategic initiatives and work that will occur next year, and that has budget tied to it, that has time tied to it, has people tied to it. So for example, some of the requests we're looking at, some of the proposals we're looking at for next year include staff and people to support our equity efforts, includes resources to support MTSS in our schools, continue our partnership with inclusive practices. And each of those will move towards a very specific concrete action plan that will identify the background information, the outcomes. We're going to be starting to tie our results monitoring outcomes to our project plan. So you'll actually get, for our major initiatives, a very detailed project plan for each of these. And so this is just a snapshot of some of the types of things you'll see in a project plan. Those will be available to the board and will also be part of our conversation during our strategic budgeting process in June through August. So going back to that, I think you saw this earlier, so I won't spend a ton of time on it, but we are really working to blend together our recovery planning efforts that are required for the Office of Superintendent and Public Instruction with our annual strategic planning process. And again, I say annual strategic planning process knowing we're in a COVID year where most of our central leadership has been focusing on getting kids back to school and making sure that kids are having as good experience as you can during COVID, and we really now are shifting our work to planning for next year. So as Barbara mentioned earlier, we have groups of administrators and teachers and staff that are looking at our plans, providing feedback so we can start to get really focused on the work that will occur next year to provide that greater level of support for all of our students and start to change some of the outcomes that we're seeing that are related to race and ability and language, and really start making a shift on those. So the recovery plan is a small piece of that. The strategic work that we'll be sharing between now and through August will be much more detailed and much more specific. So I think that is essentially the presentation, and I can go back to slides or answer questions.
Any questions from the board tonight? Director Stewart?
Mike, you and your staff have done a great job throughout this year keeping our heads above water, to be quite frank, and not drowning. And I see your plans for the coming year, but there's a lot of parents out there who are saying it's 30 days, more or less, to the end of school. What in the hell am I going to do for my son or daughter this summer? Mm-hmm. Do we have some concrete answers for them, for those that don't want to wait till next fall, or that feel they can't because they feel their student mentally, emotionally, academically, whatever, is drowning?
Yeah. So we, I actually have a slide I can pull up for you. So we are in the process, summer programs. That's interesting. That's not the one. Oh, yes, there it is on here. Thanks. So first of all, I want to say about summer programs, part of the work has been identifying teachers. And all of our teachers are saying, I've worked as hard as I've ever worked in my life. Do I really want to come to summer school and do another 6 weeks? Same with administrators. So we've been actively recruiting administrators and teachers and instructional assistants and classified folks. And so we're at a point now where we're starting to get people that are willing to participate. We've also looked at incentives and things. And the reason I'm saying that is we wanted to make sure we had all of those folks in place. And now we can start advertising our summer programs. And so this is a snapshot of some of the summer programs. I won't go into total detail on each of these, but for example, our intervention services will have summer programs for our title. We'll have literacy academies, programs for multilingual learners. At high school, we'll have credit recovery and a summer bridge academy that will help our students very specifically in academic areas. And then we also are working on a middle school prep program for some of our schools in a targeted way. In addition, I think we mentioned high school credit recovery at Lake Washington High School is going to be targeting kids who are behind in credits. In special education, we are working on extended school year and recovery services. And so those will be developed and identified through an IEP process. And so students will be identified in that process and those will be made available. And then core and enrichment. So we are looking at a K-5 core program at an elementary school that will have academics for reading and math. K-4 students at Keller Elementary will have enrichment opportunities. And so just because it's at that school doesn't mean it's only for those students. It's, again, a regional model for STEM and drama. Accelerated math will be offered for our middle school students. And then, not up here, but we also continue to have our WANIC opportunities. And so we're going to start pushing this information out to families so that they can identify areas that make sense to them. And really, again, some of this is driven by our ability to staff, but it looks promising in terms of being able to identify people that can actually be in the buildings and be available to kids. For the most part, these are in person, but we're also looking at some remote options as well.
Well, I'm sorry, Mike, but I heard that earlier. I was trying to figure out, when you talk about pushing it out to the parents and families, are we talking about those students who have been identified as having problems that you're individually talking to those families and students? Or are we talking about a general email saying, hey, we got summer school coming up. If you think your kid had a problem, think about it. Here's the programs we got to offer. Is summer school going to be more than just the July that we usually have, if I recall correctly? Especially for those students developmentally disabled, or pardon me, the SPED students who have more of a drop-off. Will that be expanded? Or will we, again, basically, I think a lot of parents will want to know, gee, is this going to be expanded? There's going to be a lot more material covered. There's going to be a lot more teachers needed. Are we going to have more time frame, so it's not just middle of the summer?
Yeah, so the answer, I think, to most of your questions is yes. So there will be direct invitation for students who have been identified. There'll be a generic, available to all, and so here's that resource. Yes, we are looking at some extensions. So the majority of the programs here are typical 4 to 6 week, but some are extending into August. And then some are specifically related to students' IEP goals, and so those are a little bit more customized. So again, just given the people we have, we really are, our goal is to expand and provide as much options and much opportunity to students as possible, and make sure we have people there to provide those resources. We're also exploring the option of a remote online type of program where we could offer that to families, and so we're looking at the cost and the capacity to do that, but we work with a company called Fuel Education that works to help with some of our credit recovery. And in addition, you can take courses through this, algebra, geometry, any number of high school courses. And so we're looking at, is that something we can make available much more widely to kind of like what you were saying, a family that just says, hey, I want some additional academic opportunities. We provide the access, and then Fuel Education really owns the instruction, and then we get the record of the student's progress or the student's achievement.
The only reason I'm asking that, and I don't doubt y'all's planning capabilities or anything, it's just the idea that I imagine there's a lot of parents that are starting to sit on pins and needles.
Yes.
Or have been already.
Yeah.
And they're starting to say, okay, what's going on? How can I plan?
Yeah.
And some of them are even, I imagine, panicking. I can imagine that.
Yeah.
I can imagine a few students being in that same boat.
Yeah, I agree.
So the earlier we can get this information out there, even if it's general information, the better.
Mm-hmm.
That's a hope of mine and an ask of y'all.
Yep.
Director Sage, and then Director Bleasner.
Thank you for that report. Have some parents already been notified that their child qualifies for some of these programs, especially the ones that are occurring over the summer?
I would have to follow up. I believe that there are a few for special education. They're starting the IEP conversations, but I don't think there's been a broad push yet because, again, we were lining up our staff, our buildings, and our administrators. So I can confirm though and follow up.
So outside of special education, is that the same? You're not quite sure if they've been notified?
Correct. I don't think we've done any major outreach yet to families, again, to make sure we had all of the things lined up. And the reason I say that, just to give a little more context, is let's say we were only able to identify 3 administrators. That's going to determine the number of buildings we can offer. If we only were able to hire teachers, what we were talking about is maybe rather than having the core and enrichment, we would have a much more targeted, focused on the greatest needs. And so we were going to prioritize based on the number of people that were available, and then the more people we can get, the broader our range of opportunities. All that being said is now that that's starting to get lined up, our next phase is to start communicating with families.
If the district can't provide what students need over the summer, what will that look like in the fall? What will some of this look like when it's enacted in the fall?
So some of those things that are part of the recovery plan, but also part of our strategic efforts. So one of the strategic efforts we're considering is folks that can help schools do assessments, use our assessment tools to screen all of our students. And so again, that's a skill that people need to have. So how are students doing in literacy, or doing in math, or doing academic, or in terms of social, emotional, and health, well-being? So that's the first step. Screen all of our students, see how they're doing. Then you can start to identify what are the supports that individual students need or groups of students need. And so that's what are the evidence-based interventions, both academic and behavioral and social emotional, that we're going to guarantee for all students. And so those are that's kind of our first step, first tier. Let's make sure that we have that screening in place, make sure we are starting to map interventions. The professional learning that I mentioned goes with that as well. So you have, as a teacher, you always have a range of students in your class and a range of skills and abilities that you have to think about. Well, we're anticipating that might be a little wider than it would normally be. So professional learning that gives teachers the skills they need to be able to provide access to instruction for their students. And so I mentioned the Universal Design for Learning, which really does allow you to take students where they are and provide instruction that meets their needs. And so that'll be part of our professional learning. And so, we're kind of thinking about how do you layer, identify how all kids are doing, make sure teachers are equipped to meet their needs, so that as we are thinking about all of our students, we really are anticipating providing that first tier of support. And then the next tier is, if you have students that aren't making the progress based on the assessments we're using, what are the evidence-based interventions you're using that follow those, and how are those being delivered? So bringing our safety net teachers in, thinking about our program teachers that really will provide those supports. So that's what I'm kind of describing there, is that multi-tiered system of supports, as you're really thinking about all of the different supports in your school and in your district and how you weave those together. And so having a leadership team that's overseeing that will be core, and that's part of our planning as well. So it's kind of a long-winded answer to say, you have to start weaving all the different supports together. And so that part of the recovery plan is identifying what do we already have in place, and then MTSS is really how do you start to coordinate it.
Is the screening that you referred to, would that take place in the fall, or is that going to take place now for summer?
No, it typically is right at the beginning of the year, so it's a fall screening. We do have results for our students. We have been using FastBridge this year, and so we have data for that. We also have grades, like I mentioned to you, attendance, like I mentioned to you. I think the challenge is, because it's a first-year assessment, it's not quite as robust as we would have for some of the assessments that have been run multiple years, and so it's not the automatic, if you're at this certain level on FastBridge, for example, you're automatically guaranteed, but it's an indicator you can use to be thinking about placement and supports.
And my last question is on the fee-paying programs.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a sliding scale so our low-income students can participate?
Yes.
And that will be a part of the email that goes out to let people know about the program?
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Director Bleasner.
Great, thanks. So just a few questions. As you were walking through MTSS, there were actually 3 things that caught my attention. One was the universal designed learning. I would find it beneficial if at some point we could have a study session on it, or just to sort of get an idea of what it is.
Yep.
So that's sort of clear, we're all speaking the same language, why it works, how it would be used in the Lake Washington School District, and what we would expect to see as it gets implemented, and what results we might be seeing by doing so. I just think that would be helpful to sort of ground that work, so when it comes, it'll be a little easier. Equitable grading practices was another point that you brought up. I just remember back when we tried to do secondary grades in middle school 8 years ago, and some of the challenges that came from that and having that discussion. So I think it'll be important that the board is brought along with what that means to be equitable in grading practices, and that we're also kept abreast moving that forward. And then the last one was the school-wide information system. That was brand new. So I would be intrigued to at least learn more about that. Again, I don't know if this is a board brief or a study session. I don't think I need it tonight, but I think those would be helpful to understand the structure of MTSS, because it sounds like that's sort of the foundational framework that's being used to drive how results, how we differentiate our instruction, how we ensure those equitable approach, so a stronger understanding of that overall framework I would find helpful.
Director Stewart?
Mike, how soon do you think these notices are going to be going out? Not only the general ones, but the specific ones to individual students or families?
The summer programs?
Yes.
I'll have to check on it. I
Okay.
know there's a timeline, but I don't have the.
The reason why I'm asking is I'm thinking there's a lot of anxious parents and a lot of anxious students out there. If indeed they have questions or they have suspicions that their student may need these, should they be contacting their teachers, their principals? Who?
So typically, what you'll get as a first-tier contact is the director who oversees the specific programs. And, if it's not the director, for example, Shannon Hitch for special education, it might be one of the directors related to elementary or secondary. So that's going to be a first line of contact. And then the second line of contact will be schools and principals. And then we'll have the schools specifically identified that have summer programs, so those principals will be queuing up to provide as well. But the first point of contact, I think the most direct, will be a director's name will be tied to each of the programs.
Okay. Well, I'm hoping that perhaps that contact information could be put out sooner than later, with the idea being it's going to take us a while to do the outreach. But if you're already concerned and already have a sneaking suspicion that your student needs help, and you want to get a jump on it, and you want to make sure that there's actually going to be a class in that area because you don't know if there's going to be teachers available in that area, it would be great to have that contact out there. Also, if we don't have the teachers/administrators enough for X, Y, or Z class, then we're going to be able to fill in with the online learning. Is that what you're saying?
For more of a general approach, yeah. I mean, specific, for example, like you saw the Summer Bridge Academy or the literacy approach, those are very specific programs that you probably wouldn't be able just to contract out to in this time frame. But the more general core types of programs, yes.
For those programs, then, for the students of less means, are those going to be prorated as well? Because I
Yeah.
can imagine those being a cost tickler.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're looking at is the cost per student, and yes, we have a sliding scale for
Okay,
families. Yeah.
so it could go anywhere from 0 to what's your wallet?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
Director Sage?
Yeah, just a request for data. Would it be possible for us, well, what can you track over the summer with whatever programs are offered that you can let us look at to see who is able to access the summer offerings and maybe look to see who is missing?
Yeah, we definitely have it. We'll have enrollment information we can do by subgroup. We can also provide achievement data. And so I believe typically in September we do a summer programs report, and so we could incorporate the demographic data into that.
If I may ask, just to build on to that, if we have the past data on summer programs that were offered, it might be beneficial to look at what that is disaggregated by those different groups to see if there's access challenges that you could address this time around. Knowing the situation's different, and actually I'd be very cautious in utilizing free and reduced lunch as the only parameter for income issues, just because it's a very different world we're in right now with COVID, and there have been this area that is not a very good indicator of actually having potential economic challenges and being able to pay for things.
In the recovery plan itself, the last question that we're asked to answer are 3 strategies for which we think our district needs more support. And we list high-quality tutoring, equitable grading practices, and inclusive practices. What does it mean where we're saying we think we need? Well, what did you understand to mean?
I can give you a very concrete example. So inclusive practices, we have a partnership with the University of Minnesota TIE Center. So that's actually a state level support. And so we're getting that support to learn about inclusive practices. Now, ultimately, we want to be a model and a demonstration for other districts, but we're still in a learning phase. Similarly, for equitable grading practices, we know that there are some districts that are doing some really phenomenal things around equitable grading practices, specifically for racial equity. And so we don't have that skill set or knowledge. And so what OSPI is looking to do is develop regional cohorts that can say, here, if you want to learn more about X, Y, or Z, go to this district. And if you recall, we have been doing that over the past few years as part of our inclusionary practices work. We visited Westland, Wilsonville down in Oregon. We visited Highline schools around their inclusive practices. Being able to go to a school and see these things in practice or talk to administrators or talk to district folks allows you to do things that you haven't done well. And we've been talking about that for years. We see differences in our data relative to other districts and how other districts are doing for groups of students. This actually allows you to call that district for specific things.
Great, that's really helpful, thank you. Director Stewart, and then I just want to remind everyone, in our packet, there is a draft resolution that we'll need to vote on tonight.
Okay. As to capacity, it probably won't help with as far as having the capacity of teachers, but is there a thought being given perhaps to an outreach to the community, whether it's to parents, to grandparents, to just community members in general who have the time and abilities, not necessarily to teach, but to help pad the support, if you will, to have those teachers in place. If you don't have an if you need 4 administrators for a building, you've got only 2 that we could reach out to for volunteering. Same way in the tutoring. I was just talking with John earlier. There's some kids up on the plateau that developed a couple of years ago an outreach, and they now have around a couple hundred kids signed up that they're helping to tutor each other.
Yep.
And it's gotten to the point where they're going to hire their own executive director. They've done that much work on it. So I'm thinking that might be another source, if we could start looking at sources like that to help broaden your reach.
Right.
Just a thought.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions? Yes, Director Bleasner?
No, I was ready to make a motion.
Great, so I'll entertain a motion for the board to approve Resolution 2313 as presented.
I'd like to move to approve Resolution Number 2313, Academic and Student Wellbeing Recovery Plan, and adopt the plan to be submitted to the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction exclusively to the 2021 and 21-22 school years.
Great, do we have a second?
If I second this, does Director Carlson still get to speak to it?
Yes, we will
Okay,
have
I will second.
an opportunity to comment. Okay, it's moved by Director Bleasner and seconded by Director Sage that we approve the Resolution 2313. Sorry, Director Carlson?
So structurally within the resolution is the public notice and the opportunity for public comment. So are we treating the online feedback as the sole opportunity for public comment, or is this something where we are taking oral comment this evening?
I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I remember discussing this at the 2 weeks prior, at our prior meeting, about being able to at least post it with the agenda, so there was an opportunity to see it
Yep.
prior. But I do agree with you, I don't actually like the process of approving when it is first presented at the board.
But
And I think that's where the thought exchange came in, because we wanted some more interaction.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to point to, that it has occurred. It is not ideal, and I agree. I mean, this is not how I like to do public comment, but at the same time, this is far from our entire budget discussion. The ESSER funds are actually a minority of our overall funds for the next year. This is just allowing us to access the ESSER funds at all. So it's not the end of the discussion around what groups or thrust MTSS. Not all of our MTSS dollars will come from ESSER.
Correct.
And so this is not the end of a conversation, much less the only time that the public will see the planning for how to spend our budget.
Director Stewart?
Yeah, I also would like to see it beyond the thought exchange. I've been going through this thought exchange now for the last month or so, and with a lot of other parents, and I have some problems. Some of it's a little too esoteric, some of it's a little bit too not in English, if you will, not easily understandable language. Some of it is written in a manner to get it seems like you're getting an answer you're already asking, and you already know your answer you want. I'm not saying that it's done intentionally, it's just the way it has drummed out. And then once you've answered the questions and they come back and say, hey, how'd you like to answer some more questions? Well, then all of a sudden, you're an overload. and I don't know how wide it actually is. I mean, from the numbers y'all gave, I know survey numbers and how you project, but for something like this, it seems like we're talking about something a little more important than which bleach to use.
Director Blaisner?
So in the resolution in regards to whether I'm in support of approving it tonight, recognizing the limitations in regards to the community comment that was able to be provided on it, and recognizing that there is opportunity. This was really the checkbox of getting sort of the key things into place, and there was a lot of more additional work that's going on behind it. So sort of with that caveat around it, and then potentially looking at what are those, because what is that feedback and how does it do, and how do we ensure we capture our entire community effectively?
Took the words out of my mouth. Thank you for
Yeah.
saying that. Yeah, I feel the same way. I'll be supporting the resolution as well. I want to thank staff for all of the hard work that it took to get this plan put together on such a short timeline. This has to be adopted by to receive funding, we have to adopt it tonight or have another board meeting before June 1, right? And this was a plan that we were required to put together in a matter of weeks. So I really appreciate all the work that went into this, and appreciate the work to get it complete. So there was at least some opportunity for public comment in advance of this meeting tonight. And it's not ideal, but I think we all recognize that. Okay.
Can we move the question?
Yes,
Should we move the question then, or
I can't hear you.
can we move the question then?
Yes.
So we can get it?
Yes. So it's been moved by Director Blaisner and seconded by Director Sage that we adopt Resolution 2313 as presented and adopt the plan to be submitted to OSPI for the 2020-2021 school years. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
The next item on the agenda tonight is the superintendent report. Looks like Dr. Holman is moving over.
So tonight, my superintendent's report is on two topics focused on planning for the 21-22 school year. It seems like each board meeting we have a new set of data and information to share with you. And so tonight, want to just review the Washington Department of Health 21-22 school year guidance that was released just last week. Also want to just reference the State Board of Education proposed permanent rules that were approved at their last meeting, also occurring last week, in regards to the ability to provide remote learning and education. And so last Thursday, the Department of Health did announce their guidance for next school year. Governor Inslee held a press conference to make that announcement, but ultimately it is the Department of Health that is updating their guidance and announced by the governor. And so a summary of that guidance is that each school will provide full-time in-person learning for all students that so wish to participate. And I think that's the kind of a key and a basis for the Department of Health guidance, that all schools are required to provide the provision of full-time in-person learning for students. In that distancing within the Department of Health guidance, it's a recommended best practice that we continue to maintain distancing within the classrooms, 3 feet between students, 6 feet between adults, and then in other spaces within the school to maintain 6 feet distancing to the greatest degree possible. But it's also referenced that this cannot be a barrier to being able to provide full-time in-person learning for all students who wish to receive that type of education. And so that's an important component to this, that the distancing can't preclude you from providing full-time in-person learning for students. The guidance has the daily attestation, the kind of that health screening that occurs at the beginning of the day. That has been removed from the Department of Health guidance. They did maintain their mask requirements for preschool through 12th grade, so P through 21 within our schools. And it just seems like this is how this entire year has been. As they were releasing this information, the President of the United States is announcing the CDC's update to the mask mandate. And so I can't tell you tonight if this masking requirement is going to be modified before next school year, because it was almost, at the same exact time that these two very important pieces of information were being released. And so for right now, that is the Department of Health guidance for the 21-22 school year. I'm assuming they are looking at the mask mandate, potentially looking at is there a difference between in the classroom versus being out at recess and things like that. But for now, this is the guidance that we have. And in the prior guidance, health and safety guidance, there was great specificity around when students washed their hands, when they used hand sanitizer. And so now it's really just about that really good hand hygiene practices, making sure that washing and sanitizing is available to students, and that we continue to highlight respiratory etiquette, such as sneezing and coughing appropriately, hand hygiene after a cough or a sneeze. And really, those are best practices that we should be working with students regardless of pandemic or not. And so that is the guidance. We are still required to implement a positive COVID case response and communication plan as part of our health and safety protocols for next school year. And so that information was released, and so we are, obviously layering that into everything we are doing. You've heard me say for a number of weeks now that we continue to plan for in-person learning for all students. And when I say all students, it's knowing that if we don't plan for all, then we haven't thought through all of the contingencies and the scale that's required. Also want to update the board around the instructional hours proposed permanent rules from the State Board of Education. We were able to provide remote learning this school year because there was an emergency rules waiver around instructional hours. And so we have, on bated breath, been waiting for the State Board of Education to take action on this. And so without fully knowing their exact process and procedure, they took action on approving these proposed permanent rules. It is now open for a public comment period and will be formally adopted in July. And so from everything that I've been asking a lot of questions from everyone that will take a call from me, these rules really won't change. Unless something very, very significant were to occur, of which no one can come up with something that significant. And so I think, notwithstanding a word change, these are pretty much the rules that we will have to play. And so the rules clarify that in-person instruction is the default method of delivery, and that other modalities such as distance or hybrid learning are allowable under a couple of circumstances. One is really around the health and safety of the needs of the student. And that's going to need a little bit more definition from someone, or if that's the only definition we get, then we would then define what that means, because health and safety of students could mean around medical, but I think there's some other ways that we could interpret that as well, because students have benefited from remote learning for other reasons than just physical health during the pandemic. And so I have wondered if that's why they chose this language, and I think it's very interesting language. The other way that we can provide remote learning is if it's in alignment with our continuity of operations plan. And that really is, when you think of continuity of operations in terms of disaster preparedness, a major emergency, such as a pandemic, they're just trying to pre-plan for the next time that there's a major issue where students can't come to school on a very broad scale, so that they don't have to come back and adopt emergency rules to be able to offer the provision of services in a remote setting. And so when we think about remote learning, we've been talking about, what does 21-22 remote learning look like? And so our next steps is really to analyze this language, gain as much knowledge about the language and some of the meaning that's embedded in it, identify a project team here internally just to map out what that implementation could look like, identify a timeline for our parents and staff surveying and getting information from those two key groups. And then we really have a decision point to make that this implementation team is going to have to think through. Is it remote learning from a home school, a neighborhood school, or do we create a single remote school where a student would receive services? And so those are all decision points, and there's a number of variables there to unpack, and so we'll go ahead and go through that work, knowing that we do have families that have reached out asking for a remote learning opportunity for the 21-22 school year. Happy to take any questions.
Director Bleasner?
Sure, I can
Now you
start.
raise your microphone.
So in regards to the proposed remote learning changes that were put forward, will we, as you read through those, it appears that you believe that that provides us the opportunity to continue with a remote learning option in the upcoming school year?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Will we be writing a letter in support or in clarification to the State Board of Education in regards to any of this? Because I would recommend that we do so.
Yes, absolutely. And that was one of the recommendations that the State Board also made.
And I have one other. You had mentioned that you had a homeschool or a single remote school. I think there are other options within there, which would be a hub school within a learning community. As we know, neighborhood schools are very important, and this is sort of a potential fill-in. I mean, there is an option of a remote school similar to the high school option that's there, but I think we need to be much more flexible in this environment due to the situation of families making these choices. And so the more we can tie to neighborhood schools, multi-class, multi-level grades, first and second together, 2, 3, how can you do it? So I just encourage not a buy option, but really a multimodal concept.
Thank you.
Director Sage? Oh, Director Stewart, sorry.
John, I really appreciate the fact that we're looking at this heavily, and I want to make sure that we have as many tools in our belt as possible when it comes to talking back to these folks, or getting back to these folks. Talking back sounds a little rude. But if we could find out how many students, and I don't know how, to be quite frank, we can do it, how accurately we can do it, of students whose families, for one reason or another, that their health, their family's health, whoever, isn't in a position to have that student come back into an in-classroom. The more we could know that, I think the better armed we'd be to go into discussions with the state board, saying, look, there are families out there, they're in need, the kids want an education, the parents want their education, but just for, not only for family health, but also for public health reasons, they can't be in a classroom, and we can't ignore them. So I appreciate what we're doing here, but if any numbers we can get, because God knows those folks in Olympia think about numbers more so than they think about bodies.
So one of the requests that the board has had over time is why did families make the choice for which learning model? And we had thought about, do we embed this into one of our surveys? And so what we did was we just released a survey that just asked the question. And so I believe we're going to package those survey results for the board and provide them in briefs this week, at least with the information to date. I believe we've had a relatively good response rate. I also wonder if those that had a story to tell, that's the kind of survey that would speak to them. So I think we will have some level of data to be able to reference.
Just tagging on to that, if with the parents that we already know that have already said, look, Johnny, Susie, whoever is not coming back in the fall, and here's why, could we specifically reach out to those families and say, okay, we want to ask you specifically, what do you need? What works best for you, for your families? And I realize this creates a lot of work for you all, but sorry.
Yeah.
But the point is, I think we would have more distinct information. We'd have very specific information for their needs, and we wouldn't be offering them perhaps something that they don't quite need, or we wouldn't be offering more than they need A versus B. We'd be tailoring the needs of our technology and our abilities to teach the kids better to the needs of the public. So if we could do that, I think it'd be fantastic.
Yeah. One of the strategies that we're going to be implementing over the next period of time is a registration week. And part of that also has a thread of it where we're actually proactively reaching out to families that did leave our district last year, but also didn't indicate that they were moving out of the area. Okay. Because I'm sure that would be an irritating email to get from us if you've moved out of state. Sure. But yeah, so that proactive outreach, and also as these plans become more specific for those families that we know left, maybe went to a different virtual setting, specifically reaching out to them as well would be beneficial.
And one last thing, the families really who had the connectivity problems despite the hotspots we got, who had the family situational aspects where remote learning made it difficult, but yet that's still what they need. Mm-hmm. I'd hope that we'd go that extra mile farther to reach out to them, saying, look, what will it take to help your student? Because if it's the fact that mom and dad are working 2 jobs each, and no one's there to supervise, make sure homework's getting done. If it's the idea that geographically they're behind a cliff and even a hotspot doesn't help, all these kind of questions, especially if we're translating it to all the various languages we need to, I want to make sure we hit everybody.
Yeah.
Director Sage, then Director Carlson. Oh, okay, still got it. Okay. Director Carlson, then Director Sage.
Not a huge question. Rather, you had pointed out the tension between the CDC guidance and the P12 guidance that came out through the DOH. And there might be some tweaking from DOH for high school level because they're eligible for vaccination. Mm-hmm. By the fall, when we are starting our school year, the elementary and middle school band aren't going to be approved yet. That's something that's going to be coming through. Through 11. So 12-year-old, but anyway, so 12 being eligible basically says high schoolers, but our middle schools are not guaranteed to be eligible. Some middle school, not all of it. Yeah, a lot of middle schoolers are 11 and not going to be eligible. Stop arguing with me. Simple point. Elementary and middle school are very unlikely to change between now and the fall, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. In terms of that particular piece of guidance, the only thing I might see some wiggle room from DOH is high school. So,
yeah.
Anyway.
You know, and can I just take this moment to also recognize the vaccine clinic that will be occurring on the 22nd and 23rd of this month and the 12th and the 13th as a second dose next month that we've been promoting to our families and students, wanting to give our students as easy of access. That will be located on the 22nd at 2 of our high schools, on the 23rd at the other 2 comprehensive high schools, in the same pattern on the 12th and the 13th.
Can you give the names of the high schools for those who didn't read it, perhaps? Or is there someone in the room?
Well, really,
I'm sorry.
So Matt's going to give me that information real quick. I believe it's Redmond on the 22nd. I know that for a fact.
just thinking it'd be worth it.
Juanita and Redmond on the 22nd,
Right.
and I'm going to deduce from that that Lake Washington and East Lake will be on the 23rd, and it's the same pattern on the 12th and the 13th of June.
Those who are listening now but haven't read it yet.
Okay.
And at those vaccination events, it's not just the kids that are eligible, it's also family members, right?
It is correct, and we've specifically promoted this to families first because we wanted our students to have that first opportunity. And so, but yes.
Director Sage, then Director
Okay.
Stewart.
Just a quick follow-up. For the families, once we get our kids situated, the families who are like on the border where we've got, in the Plateau, you've got Skyline, you've got Eastside Catholic, all these other schools, North Shore that's so close to some of the schools, will those students be able to get into those programs? Just asking.
So I believe right now it's an open clinic that people can register for. And so it's through our partnership, we've been promoting it first to our students and families. And then here in the coming days, we'll promote it broader.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Just a request that we communicate and publicize the comment period to the State Board of Education on the remote learning options so that the voice of Lake Washington parents can be heard. And then, was it 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, the East Side directors met with Public Health Seattle King County, and it was my understanding that they were expecting to have updated guidance on that, but I thought they said they were also looking at updated guidance from the CDC as far as what a close contact is and how long you would have to either stay at home if you were a close contact, or the difference between 10 days and 14 days. So I'm just curious if you reached out to Public Health to ask if there has been any update in that, or if there is a plan to update that.
I haven't personally recently. I know the team has been in contact with them. I'll check and I'll let the board know.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And just following up with that, as vaccine has become more accessible and available, how will that play out in regards to those components in our policy changes and to the quarantine component? If you're fully vaccinated, which takes 5 to 6 weeks, depending as to which one you get, or potentially 2 if it's the Johnson & Johnson. But I think those are some of the other questions that are coming out with that.
I would be remiss if I tried to stand up here and give you a great level of specificity about each of those items. And so, but as guidance gets updated, we have a whole process here that we run it through a team, a filter. We reach out to Public Health if we have questions. So then we update our COVID-19 safety plan. We have a process to broadcast that to the entire organization. So that's procedurally how we do it, but it's a whole team effort to be able to understand and take action on the guidance.
On the offering of remote learning for next year, I'm curious, so if we're saying we're providing the option for students to enroll in fully remote learning if they so wish, are we understanding that to be that any student who wants to enroll in remote learning will be able to do it next year, or will we have caps on the capacity?
Yeah, as we're looking at our online school enrollment, one of the challenges is knowing how many families actually will, at the end of the day, say yes to a remote placement. Richard Snyder is working through that process right now, and it's not simple to get a yes because it's a substantial change, and so there's a data element for us in our planning. So, but just my initial impression is it's not going to be a large-scale quantity issue. It's going to be more, do we actually have enough students to appropriately run a program? So that's where I am today. That could change as families let us know.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Director Stewart, and then anyone else with the last?
To that end, I'd wholly encourage us to, as we're looking at numbers, and if the numbers aren't blossoming like we anticipate, or we do need to have more numbers, I would encourage us really to look at the other districts around us, say, hey, what can we do together to create such an animal so that we can help each other? Because it may be the situation, there's just not enough here, or the district next to us may not have enough at all, and by clustering them together, everybody gets helped.
Yeah.
Director Sage?
So you mentioned that it depends on what we hear from families as far as remote learning. Are we going to send a specific communication asking them to weigh in on remote learning?
Yeah, and that's really going to be, as you think about implementation team, they'll kind of work through all of the details of that. But then ultimately, we're going to have to survey both families and staff. Because I know there's some staff that would like a remote placement, but we have to find out who those folks are.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is Public and Community Affairs. Director Sage, do you have anything to report?
I'm just going to thank Barbara for doing all of the legwork and putting together such a great presentation on how the legislative session went and how it affects our budget and the things that will help us a little bit and the things that we still need to push on for the next session. Thank you for doing all of that.
Okay, the next item and the last item on the agenda for tonight are board member comments. Do any board members have additional comments for tonight? Director Bleasner?
I would just like to say thank you for being able to get the access to the vaccine available and quickly for that. That is just one more layer of protection and mitigation for our students, families, and community, and should be helpful in trying to really support return to full person online learning. So thank you so much. And you should know, all our surrounding school districts are also hosting. I was just confirming Issaquah was, and I did find theirs on here, and I know North Shore is, Bellevue has, and so that's the good thing. This actually is a county-wide effort to help ensure access for all our students and families.
Director Stewart?
Yeah, I just wanted to let staff that may not be devotees or even likers of Facebook, that the outreach to inform as many publics as possible, closed pages, open pages, whatever. People have been really supportive, John, and they've been very thankful that we're doing this. And these comes from some of our critics, to be quite frank, too, because they realize how quickly we turned this around, and they appreciate it. So I just wanted you to know, and I wanted staff to know, because y'all don't always hear the thank yous.
I have a request for follow-up, I guess. The public comment tonight was on school start times. And I was honestly having a hard time remembering where we last left this with the start time advisory group. And then there was a recommendation in 2019, according to my emails on the website, in 2019. I honestly couldn't remember. So I'm just wondering if you could put together a recap and board briefs of what happened, just a short recap, what the process was when we last looked at this, what the thinking was, and what the thinking was for when we would look at it again.
And whether or not the environment's changed.
What's that?
And whether or not the environment has changed, perhaps, in a lot of
Sure.
respects.
And that's something we've talked about as a board is, we've learned a lot about remote learning in the last year, and how can we leverage that as a way of providing more options for students to have later start times. So, thank you. Any other board member comments? Great. Okay. Under the Open Public Meetings Act, in-person board meetings are now permitted in compliance with current regulations. But attendees must pre-register to attend either a board meeting or study session, and due to limited capacity, registrations are on a first-come, first-served basis. Registrations are accepted until 1 p.m. on the date of the meeting. You can register to attend by emailing Diane Jenkins at the email address djenkins@lwsd.org by 1 p.m. on the date of the meeting. Our next meeting is June 17. A study session held in the boardroom and live streamed at 5 p.m., followed by the business meeting of the board at 7 p.m., also in the boardroom and live streamed. I will now entertain a motion to adjourn the May 17, 2021 board meeting.
So moved, noting that there are 7 empty seats, so sign up.
There you are. Yes, there are. Yes, that's right. There are open seats. So
Second.
there's room to come to the next one. Thank you, Director Stewart. Do I have a second?
Yes.
Moved by Director Stewart, seconded by Director Carlson. We adjourn. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye.
Aye.
All opposed, hearing none, the motion carries. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.